Welcome to episode 24 of my 2022 training diaries. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about how my race went last weekend at UTMB, one of the biggest and most iconic trail races in the world. We arrived back home here in Vancouver, Canada on Tuesday evening after spending a month in France. And if you've been following my training diaries throughout the season, you'll know that I had a pretty busy summer starting really back in mid-June with a trip to the country of Georgia for my first goal race of the season there, followed by a road trip to Colorado for 2 weeks in July before leaving for Europe on August 1st. So it's nice to be back home because I have a lot of editing work to catch up on, including now a film from both our fast pack of the Tour de Mont Blanc from that first week in August when we arrived in Chamonix, and now from UTMB as well. But in this video, I'm going to give you a sneak peek at some of the footage from the race as I discuss the lessons that I learned during UTMB. But first, I'll bring you up to speed on the last few runs that I did the week of the race, as well as our gear preparations leading up to the start of the race on Friday. So Monday I took as a rest day. We were still in La Plagne, where we had spent the week prior living at an altitude of 2,100 meters, which I told you all about in last week's video. On Tuesday, we arrived in Chamonix.
Avec vue sur le Mont Blanc?
So we've arrived back in Chamonix, and there's definitely a noticeable difference in the energy and the number of people out in the streets from a few weeks ago when we were here to do the Tour de Mont Blanc. So fortunately, our apartment's up here on the hill. A little bit difficult to get to with your suitcases, but we're about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the start-finish line. So we're just far enough away from the noise and the chaos because it gets pretty noisy and pretty chaotic here during UTMB race week. After getting checked into our Airbnb, I went out for a steady state run, which is something I've pretty much always done the week of a big race. How does it feel to be back in Chamonix?
Well, it's nice not being at 2,000 meters.
Yeah.
I can breathe again.
I started with a 15-minute warm-up, followed by 15 minutes at just below tempo effort, so around 7 RPE, followed by a 15-minute cooldown. On Wednesday, I had a 30-minute easy run on the schedule, so we got up early to join a group run that was being organized by our friends Billy and Hillary. And already I'd realized that my experience in Chamonix this time was going to be very different than the last couple of times I was there, as so many people were now familiar with my YouTube channel.
That's you, man. You're famous worldwide.
So that was playing in a market somewhere?
Yeah, just a couple of blocks away.
Thursday, I had another short workout on the schedule, but this one was more for the mind than for the body. The idea was to run around 25 to 30 minutes in total with 4 or 5 pickups lasting 45 to 60 seconds, where I'd start at around zone 3 and would push up to maximal effort by the end. And this one was really just to work out the nerves, so the goal was to run hard for no more than 5 minutes in total. We also spent some time at the NAC booth at the Race Expo, where we got to meet quite a few of our subscribers, so thanks to all of you who came out to say hello. We then spent the rest of the afternoon prepping our gear and nutrition for the race. So I'm just preparing my nutrition for the race, and I'll be supplementing my nutrition with NAC's new drink mix powder, which includes protein and amino acids, which is important for longer efforts like this over 24 hours. So I'm just pre-portioning some servings into little baggies like this. I'll be carrying a bunch of these with me. I'll have more in my drop bags, up to 200 calories per hour. And then I'll be supplementing this with some other products from NAC, some bars and some waffles, along with, of course, food from the aid stations as well. And this is a strategy that I tested a couple weeks ago while fast packing the Tour de Mont Blanc. I was filtering water along the way and using the drink mix along with food that we were buying in town and at the refuges, and it worked out really well for me. So if you want to learn more about NAC's Ultra Energy Drink Mix and their other products, visit nacbar.com and use my discount code for 15% off at checkout. And the race then started on Friday evening. Audrey and I lined up fairly early to try to get a good spot so we weren't too far back in the crowd, and we ended up running into Ben Parks, a YouTuber from the UK, and his partner Sarah.
Hi.
So the first thing that you'll quickly learn at UTMB is that it's a very crowded race, especially in the first 10 kilometers or so. It really felt like a big city road marathon, and part of what makes UTMB so magical is the amazing support from the crowds that line the streets and many of the trails. The crowds were pretty much constant all the way to Les Houches and even partway up the first big climb. So we're talking almost 10 kilometers of cheering supporters. This is something you absolutely would not see at any other trail race. But with the more than 2,700 runners in the 100-mile distance, it can also be a bit of a stressful experience because unlike a road race, there's a lot of narrow single track. It feels like you're pretty much always passing someone or being passed, and this is the case for pretty much the entire race. And I found it hard to just relax and to run my own race, so I think you really need to be mentally prepared for this. The second thing that I realized, actually while fast packing the course a few weeks before the race, is that the climbs and descents are much steeper and more technical than in many other trail races, especially when attempting to navigate them in the dark. Very few of the climbs are actually runnable. There are a lot of steep switchbacks, and you're relying very heavily on your poles the entire time. But this shouldn't really be a surprise given that there is close to 10,000 meters, almost 33,000 feet of elevation gain on the route. But it's the descents that really do the damage to your body. The climbs use up energy, but the downhills really beat up your quads. And if you're not careful, this can do muscular damage early on that will be virtually impossible to recover from. So you really need to pace yourself on the descents to save some quad strength for later on in the race. The problem though is that many of the descents are so steep that you end up having to do a lot of braking. And many of them are also quite technical, which can be much more strenuous as well. You absolutely need to train for these long descents if you want to be successful in this race. And unfortunately, doing short hill repeats may not cut it because the downhills on this course, like many in the Alps, are just relentless. I think I had enough hill training in my legs to handle it, but I definitely could have used more. You'll remember that my race in the country of Georgia back in June was quite runnable, and so my training up till that point reflected this. I then only had a couple of weeks to recover before doing one last block of specific training for UTMB, followed by a taper. So I did a bit of training in Colorado in late July, followed by our fast pack of the Tour de Mont Blanc in early August, but that was really the extent of my training in the mountains this season. Ideally, I would have had at least another couple of months in between those races in order to do 2 more blocks of specific training for UTMB. So with that in mind, I had to pace the race a little more conservatively than I might have otherwise. And last, but certainly not least, UTMB really is an eating contest more than anything else.
Okay, some Mars bars for the road. It's time to get out of here.
The race starts at 6 p.m., but you've got to line up much earlier, so you're basically starting hungry, and this makes it really easy to fall behind on your nutrition early on. So I ate early and I ate often. Multiple bowls of soup with noodles at every major life pace. Plenty of fruit, bread, crackers, cheese, and more. Our friend Charles was crewing us, so he was able to provide me with some other snacks as well at a few of the life bases.
Okay, had soup, bread, ham, chips. I think I'm good.
And I supplemented all of this with a drink mix powder from NAC, close to 3,000 calories worth over the course of the race, so just under about 100 calories per hour. One downside though is that I did have to pee a lot, likely from all of the protein that I was ingesting. But that was a small sacrifice to make, and it was really nice to know that I was staying nice and hydrated. And I think that this is a strategy that I'll use moving forward for all of my races, supplementing with drink mix powders, because it's a great way to ensure that you're getting in at least a minimum amount of calories in between aid stations, even when you don't feel like eating while on the run. There was a lot of carnage during this race, and a lot of runners didn't finish. And many who did, but who maybe missed their time goals, attributed this to having fallen behind on their nutrition. In Kilian's own words on Twitter, the winner of the race, of course, just a couple of days ago, you need to eat, and eat more. An ultra trail is an eating challenge while running and hiking in nice places. And I think this is one area that I really nailed during my race at UTMB. I arrived back in Chamonix early on Sunday morning after 34 hours and 35 minutes. This was a lot longer than I'd originally hoped for, but in retrospect, given these lessons I learned along the way and in terms of where my fitness was at on the hills, I think my original goals may have been a little unrealistic.
390th, 175 kilometers around the Mont Blanc Massif. I'm tired. I'm ready for bed.
I originally had hoped to run sub 30 hours as my A goal, but I would have been happy with up to about 32 hours. So you think that running over 34, that I'd be unhappy. But the reality is that I never really had a low point, and I enjoyed almost every minute of the race. Having said that, I did get super tired after about 30 hours, and I was really struggling to stay awake through the final couple of climbs. The fact that we started in the evening definitely didn't help either. So finishing a little faster, say a few hours faster, would have meant avoiding having to run so late into the second night and possibly avoiding a lot of that fatigue, a lot of that tiredness I had. And I could have definitely shaved 30 minutes or possibly even up to an hour off of my time by being much more efficient at the aid stations. That always tends to be where I waste a lot of my time, as most of us do.
Grazie.
I, of course, also wasted a bit of time at least, maybe call it another half an hour with filming, especially if you consider the extra weight that I carried, at least 700 grams worth of camera gear and spare batteries. I struggle to think of where I could have really made up much more time on the course itself, so overall I'd say my execution was pretty much bang on. Now, I wouldn't say I had a great race, but I would say that it went fairly well and that I did the best I could with the amount of specific training I had done. Now, if I was to run UTMB again, I would definitely target it as my only race for the season to ensure that I could really focus on doing more of the right kind of training. But for next season at least, I think I'll focus on other things. The video from this race is going to be epic, I promise you. I shot just a ton of footage using a combination of a GoPro, a 360 camera, and my iPhone, along with footage shot by Audrey during her own race. So you're going to be seeing a dual perspective, and Audrey's experience during UTMB was a little bit different than mine.
I am in very rough shape. That climb pretty much broke my spirit.
But you're gonna have to wait until the film is released later this fall to hear more about that. Next week, I'll tell you about my recovery from the race as well as my plans for the rest of the season. And then I'll have just one more episode in the series for you after that where I've got something a little bit different planned. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, give this video a like, and I will talk to you all next week.